I'm going to do something that I haven't done for a while. In fact, I've never done this. I'm going to show a secular video in just a moment, and I'm going to ask you to do two things. Number one, don't walk out. Number two, as you're watching this video, try to determine what the message of this video is. What is the communication that is happening here? What is the philosophy and the theology behind this video? These are some great philosophers from a group called Banners. And let's go ahead and roll it, Scott, if you would. If anybody left, thank you for that. Several years ago, I realized something about our lives as human beings. We're all worshipers. We worship. We're made to worship. And this video has a message. The message is, I want to be someone. And the message even goes a little bit further. It sounds actually like something good. I want to be someone to you. We worship. We're made to worship. All of us worship all the time. And we want to matter. We want our lives to matter. I was reading a book about Abraham Lincoln recently, and at a deep, dark time in his life, he wrote, how hard it is to die and leave one's country no better than if one had never lived. The problem in all of life is, what are you going to do about your worship? What are you going to worship? Here at Calvary, we have come to realize that when we choose to worship anything or anyone, even ourselves, other than the God of the universe, we're going to be disappointed. God is the only person in the universe that can bring us eternal satisfaction. Anything else that we worship, anyone else that we worship, including ourselves, will never bring us satisfaction. I want you to look at the question that David asks in Psalm 15:1. O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? What's David asking when he asks that question? As you look at the two symbols in verse 1, you've got a tent and a holy hill. Most of you who have any sort of experience reading the Bible know that, well, the tent is probably the tabernacle, because we're in the Old Testament, and the tabernacle was this temporary worship center that housed the presence of God among the people. The holy hill usually refers to Zion or to Jerusalem, where the temple was. And so David is saying, where you are, God, where your presence is, in the tent or in the temple, who can be there? These places were places of worship. What kind of worshipers can be around you, God? This verse is an extreme contrast from the last psalm that we read. Psalm 14:1 says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. There's no question in this psalm about God's existence. He exists, and this psalm asks these questions. Who can sojourn in your tent? Who can dwell on your holy hill? How can people be with you? Really is what David is asking. How can people be with you, God? The tent and the holy hill were both places where people worshiped, where they experienced the presence of God. And so David is saying, how can people have a relationship with you? How can they have communion with you, fellowship with you, friendship with you? How can people be with you? Now that's a crucial question in all of life. And maybe today you are a person who is here who has decided, you know what? God exists. I believe that something cannot come from nothing, and so I believe that a superior being somehow placed this world into existence. Well, that's great. But with a being this powerful who could put this world into existence, what if you aren't on his side? You want to be with this being. You want to be on the right side of a being this powerful. You want to be on his side. A couple years ago, a young woman was seeking a job. And she was able to obtain a job interview at a company that she really wanted to work for. And so for weeks before this interview, she studied the website of this company. She memorized the values that they had. she determined everything that she could about that company so that when she went into that interview, she could say, I'm on your side. I share what is important to you. Those things are also important to me. And when this young woman met the CEO, she wanted to be able to say, I'm with you. I'm right with you. You think this, so do I. You act this way, so do I. This morning, maybe you've been around Calvary Church for a while, and you might come to me after the service and say, hey, Pastor Steve, what kind of a person do you need to be to really be an intricate part of this church? In essence, I could point to Psalm 15 and say, here it is. Here's what's necessary to be with God. Now, for the next verses, 2 through 5, we can see David telling us what kind of people worship God and have this relationship with Him. What kind of people are really with God. And packed into these verses are descriptions of what kind of people are with God and have a relationship with Him. There's a pattern here. There are 3 positive statements, 3 negative statements, 2 more positive and 2 more negative. Now, they're all positives in that they tell us what kind of people are with God and have a relationship with Him, but they're stated a couple times in negative ways. And I found it helpful to look at these verses in some real broad categories. Category number 1 would be, what are some of the life tendencies of people who are with God? Well, they are blameless in their walk. They are doing what is right. And they are speaking truth in their heart. Last week, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Well, these people in their heart gladly proclaim the existence of God and His power here on earth. So these folks that are with God have some tendencies in life. It doesn't always happen in their lives, but you can look at their lives and say, this is generally the type of life that they lead. They're blameless in their walk and the way that they live. They do what's right and they speak the truth. These folks also have speech that is significant. Their speech is not slanderous. They don't speak evil of their neighbor. And they don't take up reproach against a friend. The worshiper who's got a relationship with God doesn't mock or ridicule others simply because others are mocking or ridiculing them. And so speaking for people who have a relationship with God has some general patterns. No slander. They don't speak evil of their neighbor. And they don't go and stab their friends in the back verbally. Speech is different. There are some things that you could call affections, those things that grab our heart. And the affections of a person who has this relationship with God is interesting in that a vile person is despised. This isn't politically correct language that we find in Psalm 15:1. A true worshiper of God honors the people of God and remembers that the non-people of God are not the same, and they make a distinction between the people of God and those people who are not people of God. They honor those who fear the Lord. A few years back, there was a church in our area who wanted to gain more people. And we all want that. Most churches don't want to stay stagnant and say, don't come here. Mostly we want to grow. We want more people and to be involved. So this church went on a blitz and they sent all kinds of mailers to people here at Calvary. Some of you living in Broomfield got some of these letters from this church. Their website had this big banner, and they had this program where they were trying to reach people. And the theme of the program was interesting. The theme was, "This ain't your grandma's church." This ain't your grandma's church. Interesting, isn't it? The idea is, maybe if you're a younger person, you don't want to go to your grandma's church. And if you've got a church with grandmas in it, we don't want to be there. Now, I didn't call the pastor and get mad at him and take him out to lunch, give him what for. But it's interesting to me the lengths to which people will go to attack other believers in order to gain more folks coming to their church. The follower of God, the person who is with God, honors fellow followers of God. Charles Spurgeon, the pastor in England in the late 1800s, had a woman who was perplexed and who was absolutely convinced that she was not saved. She didn't have a right relationship with God. She was going to go to hell. And so Spurgeon finally talked to her one day, and he said, "Why do you come to church in the first place? Why are you here?" And she said to him, "Well, I come because I can't keep away. I love the people of God, I love the house of God, and I love to worship God." And Spurgeon said, "You know, that means there's a pretty good chance you're saved." If you love the people of God and you love to worship God and you love the church of God, that kind of means you're saved. That kind of means you're okay, that you have a relationship with God. Loving the people of God is a sign that you're with God. There's also integrity that's a part of this person who is with God. He swears to his own hurt and does not change. What does that mean? I heard several years ago of a person here at Calvary who wanted to get their house painted. And they found a person who did house painting, and they had a handshake deal to get their house painted. A week after that, a couple of college guys came and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, we're trying to get a business off the ground for the summer, and we'd love to paint your house." "Well, I'm already doing it." What did he quote you for a deal? And the person gave him that price. And the college guy said, "We'll do it for half. We'll do it for half that." What does a person of integrity do? Well, they swear to their own hurt. They've given their word, and so they pay the higher price because that is an arrangement that they've made. Integrity. Finally, people who are with God have a contentment about them. This contentment means that they don't have to make all kinds of money. They don't put money out at interest. That means that they're not concerned to bleed someone for everything that they can. They don't take a bribe against the innocent. When they have the power, they don't exploit a person simply to pad their own bank account. There's a contentment. They're people that pray Proverbs 30, 7-9. "Two things I ask of you, God. Deny them not before I die. Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, 'Who's the Lord?' Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of the Lord." John Wesley shook the nation of Great Britain with the gospel. And he did not come to Christ right away in life. He went through a lot of experiences before he became a follower of Jesus. And when he was in college, he had an experience with a porter. And in England in the 1700s, the poorer college students served the other college students as servants. And there was a porter who was on the floor that John Wesley was living on. And John Wesley talked to this guy one day and said, hey, I want to talk to you. What do you have? And he found out that on that particular day of life, this young man that was serving him had the clothes on his back and water. And yet this porter was so happy. And Wesley talked to him a little bit further. And he said, you thank God when you have nothing to wear, nothing to eat, and no bed to lie on. What else do you thank God for? And Wesley's thought was, there's nothing left. And the porter said, I thank him that he has given me my life and my being and a heart to love him and a desire to serve him. That left a mark on John Wesley's life because he saw in this person who had nothing, he saw a contentment that came because this person had the most valuable possession, God himself. Contentment makes a mark. You could summarize these 5 areas under one label: holy. People who are with God, people who worship God, are holy people. And this isn't a surprise. Leviticus 11 and 1 Peter 1:16 both quote God, who says, you shall be holy because I am holy. Psalm 15 in many ways is a description of one who would come some years later by the name of Jesus Christ, who lived this out perfectly. Now, looking at Psalm 15, there's a way in which you could look at these verses and these words that I've been speaking so far, and you could say, wow, this sounds kind of like legalism. Pastor Steve, you've told us that, there's not some magic formula. You don't stick a quarter into God and get a candy bar out. This sounds like legalism, like you have to do this to worship God. What gives? I want you to go back to verse 1 of Psalm 15 with me for just a moment. O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? Tent and hill. Back to those 2 symbols. They represent the presence of God on earth with his people. And if you're familiar with the Bible at all, these 2 words may not strike you as very significant. You just read over them, tent and hill. Yes, you might say, I remember the exodus of the nation of Israel. God delivered them from Egypt, from slavery, and they're wandering around the desert, and they're wandering and they're living in tents, and there in the middle of all these tents is the tent of God, the tabernacle. Yeah, so what? And yeah, I remember the holy hill, the temple of God, the beauty of it, and the fact that God's presence was signified by that temple. So what? So what? Think about this for just a moment. Why would God ever want to be near us? When you look at other religious belief systems, God is far away and people are trying to reach God. Why would the God who spoke this universe into existence ever want to be near us? As I was reading this week, I came to a quote by Dale Ralph Davis. And he writes this: at the end of the book of Exodus, there is God's tent in the middle of Israel's tents. a testimony to his own deep desire. It's as if God simply cannot get close enough to his people. It's as if God simply cannot get close enough to his people. After reading those words, I don't know if I'll ever see tent or tabernacle again the same. It's as if God can't get close enough to his people. The tent and the tabernacle, the tent and the temple, represent the fact that God wants to be close to his people. That's incredible. And what does this action of God say to us? Grace. Grace, right? It's grace. We don't deserve it. Why would God want to be near us? Grace, grace, grace. There's grace in Psalm 15. It's not legalism. There's grace. And I don't know if you can tell, but I'm excited about this morning. I am excited about what is in Psalm 15 because there is something even greater that comes as we turn to the New Testament. And the Word became flesh in John 1:14 and dwelt among us. We have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And the word dwelt means pitched his tent. Come on, pitched his tent. Do you get it? This is incredible, isn't it? It's as if God can't get close enough to his people, and so he sent Jesus to pitch his tent among us. I don't know about you. I want this God. I want him in my life. I want him on my side. I want to know him. I want to have a relationship with him. I want to follow him. I want to believe in him. I want to have faith in him. God who spoke this world into existence. God who created us male and female. God who saw us as his creatures rebel against him. Sent his Son to pitch his tent among us. Wow. That's the gospel. Now, I'm not going to show much of this secular movie because I've already shown a secular video this morning. But if you have never seen the greatest secular movie of all time, I encourage you to watch it sometime. The greatest secular movie of all time is the movie Hoosiers. Many people are not aware of the great length that the makers of Hoosiers went to for authenticity. It would have been much, much cheaper to film the movie in Canada, but they didn't. They filmed it actually in the state of Indiana where the story takes place. They went through the state and they made sure that there were no signs for unleaded gas because unleaded gas did not exist in the 1950s. They went through and made sure that there were no Reebok tennis shoes visible in the movie because the Reebok company did not exist in the 1950s. And they actually worked with the actors and trained them how to play basketball like 1950s people played basketball. You didn't dribble between your legs and all that kind of stuff. And you shot these weird-looking set shots, and so they retrained their players, all for authenticity. The purpose of Psalm 15 is to show us what an authentic follower of God who wants to commune and worship with God looks like. Now, some of you, in looking at Psalm 15, may be encouraged. You may say, you know, I'm living this way, but I haven't really put it together. I sort of have looked at it like I have to do this stuff, and now I see it flowing out of a relationship with the God of the universe. You might be encouraged by Psalm 15. Some of you might be looking at this and say, wow, you know, when it comes to my contentment, when it comes to my speech, when it comes to my integrity, I've got a ways to go. Well, this psalm acts in your life like a mirror. And now you can set some things right. This psalm is going to do one of two things today. It's going to encourage or restore. And either way, it's a win. This psalm is either encouraging or restoring. Take your pick this morning, but Psalm 15 is win-win. This psalm starts out with this question: who can be with you, God? What kind of people worship you? What do they look like? What's missing in our worship? And God concludes this psalm with the assurance that we are safe in his hand. He who does these things will never be moved. All David asked for was to be in the presence of God. And God goes beyond that and promises security. Once again, God over-delivers. We're all walking through the muck of life, and we're all worshipers. We worship something all the time. What's missing in your worship?